Well, good afternoon, my opera friends throughout Hampton Roads. I am so glad to be back with you, bright-eyed, bushy-tailed for another season of Virginia Opera Previews, bringing you my insights, my take on our main stage productions for the 2017-2018 season that opens, of course, this coming Friday at 8 p.m. at the Harrison Opera House. So that will be Camille Saint-Saens' grand opera, his epic, his Hollywood blockbuster, Saint-Saens and Delilah, or as we're marketing it in English, Samson and Delilah. By the way, you know what's kind of fun? If you say the name of the composer followed by the name of the hero, you get all four permutations of a particular French vowel. Something like this, Saint-Saens Samson, which is kind of fun to say 5 times in a row real fast. But on to the opera. Samson and Delilah is a tale obviously out of the Old Testament, of the Bible, from the book of Judges. And in that sense, it was an unlikely choice for an opera in the 19th century. Biblical subjects were considered a little bit inappropriate for the stage, mostly because, not because of the sexual content, but because of who would be portraying and depicting biblical characters, those nasty theater people. You know about theater people. They all smoke opium pipes in their opium dens, and the actresses take lover after lover. They're a disreputable bunch, I tell you. And for them to depict sacred stories was considered a little bit scandalous. That is one reason, but not the main reason, that Samson and Delilah was very slow to be accepted by the opera world. Camille Saint-Saens, of course, you know his music if you listen to 90.3 regularly, as we hope you do, and we hope that you support it as well. You hear a lot of Saint-Saens music. You hear Carnival of the Animals, with the cellos playing the swan, and the piano's going doobie, 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 doobie. You hear the Danse Macabre, you hear the great organ symphony and the piano concertos. You know, I have always noticed that this station, more than any other public radio station I've ever heard, has a thing for his Egyptian Piano Concerto No. 5. I have heard that concerto a disproportionate number of times through the years. It seems to be a favorite. So he is primarily an orchestral and piano composer. He was one of the great concert pianists who ever lived. Saint-Saens lived during the Industrial Revolution, when the concert grand piano reached pretty much the capabilities technically that we enjoy today. So you had the phenomenon of the touring virtuosos like Franz Liszt and Saint-Saens and many others. So people were slow to accept this opera. He began writing it in 1865. His original intent was to produce an oratorio. Oratorios were making a comeback, and you know what an oratorio is. It's generally a sacred choral work, with the chorus on risers having a disproportionate amount of the music, 4 soloists, soprano, alto, tenor, bass, with orchestra, and not staged, no costumes, no props, just a concert version. This was the original idea, and so one of the lasting vestiges of that first plan is that this is a magnificent choral opera. You have choruses of Hebrews, choruses of Philistines. And if you enjoy magnificent choral singing, then that's an asset for you with this opera. You will enjoy it. Now, so he began in 1865, and as he progressed fairly slowly, he came around to the idea of actually having it staged as an opera. Worked on it in fits and starts. He's a busy touring virtuoso. It was completed by 1870, and you know, no one wanted to do it. Now, he is a native of Paris, France. He is a native son, a favorite son, a celebrity, one of the world's great musicians. And here he's written this magnificent opera, and there was no interest in it. The Paris Opéra said, mais non. It was not until 1877, 12 years after he began it, 7 years after he completed it, that his friend and colleague, Franz Liszt, said, I don't know why they won't do it. Come over to Weimar, Germany. I will produce your opera. We'll do it over here. So finally, Samson and Delilah got a hearing, and do you know it was not until 1890, 25 years after the project began, that at last Paris heard Samson and Delilah. And of course, it's been standard repertoire ever since. It will be performed as long as opera is done. It is an authentic masterwork. It is gorgeous. It is complex. It is very compelling dramatically, as you'll see as we proceed with my little preview here today. Now, the question is, and I'm going to use the music to explain this, why was Paris, why was France so slow to accept Samson and Delilah? Believe it or not, it's not because the sexuality of it was shocking. Well, it was a little shocking to have a female character as evil and sinister as Delilah. That's true. It was a little unusual to have an opera in which there's no role for a soprano. Try making a list of the famous operas, the standard operas, that do not have a solo role for a soprano. It'll be a short list. So, it's not really star-making material for your prima donnas. Delilah is a mezzo-soprano, a dark, sultry, husky-voiced temptress, of course. Actually, this opera was slow to be received in France because it was a political hot potato. It was incendiary. It was dangerous. And how could that be? Well, let's get going with a little bit of the music. Now, as the curtain opens, the people of ancient Israel are in captivity. This is their story throughout the Old Testament and throughout the history of the Israelis, the Hebrews. When they obey God and are faithful, then it's fine. It's the land of milk and honey, and we rock and roll. But when they forget God and are disobedient, they find themselves in captivity, in bondage. And as the curtain opens, they're in bondage to the Philistines. In the city of Gaza, Gaza is a city that's still that we know about today in headlines from time to time, a center of the Israeli-Arab conflict, isn't it? And the curtain opens, and we have these people, these Hebrew people, that are miserable. And they sing a lamentation, a powerful choral depiction of their suffering as a people. They believe that Jehovah, the God who chose them, they are the chosen people of God, but God has forgotten them, and they are languishing at hard labor for life. And here's a little bit of a powerful choral depiction of their suffering. And there it is. Now the table is set for a hero to emerge, a champion who will slay the enemy and lead these people out of bondage. And of course, that is Samson, as we read about in the book of Judges in the Old Testament. Samson, and by the way, it'll take me a few minutes to do this, but remember where I'm going with the next several excerpts is to explain to you why Samson and Delilah was considered politically provocative and why it was kind of unofficially banned from French stages for a quarter of a century. So in the midst of this group misery of the Hebrew slaves in bondage to the Philistines in the city of Gaza, arises this muscle-bound young gentleman, Samson. He is chosen. He has the long hair that indicates that he is raised in the Nazarite sect. And he has made solemn vows to God, and he has superhuman strength because God has chosen him. And if he breaks any of these vows, for instance, if he goes to a barber shop, he will become as weak as any man. But right now, he emerges from the crowd, and he has an inspirational speech to give. He tries three times, actually. I'll play you the third of these. He's telling people, he's a little bit like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. I have a dream. He's trying to inspire his people to fight for their human rights. We don't have to live like this, my friends. We can rise up. We can oppose our tormentors, our oppressors. We can fight for our liberty, and with God's help, we will get it. And at first, everybody's like, yeah, sit down and cut some more crops. We don't believe you. But as someone once said, still he persists. And by his third attempt, Samson has become quite a skilled orator. He speaks with passion and commitment. Well, listen to him. Here he is telling the people to have faith. And now the people are buying into what Samson is selling. They have the vision. They've caught fire. Well, it was pretty inspiring. I would follow a guy like that into battle, wouldn't you? And at this point, they are interrupted by a bureaucratic town official. Out comes Abimelech, who's been overhearing this from his, 12th-story office in a skyscraper nearby with the windows open, where he's pushing paper and settling a garbage workers' strike in the city of Gaza. He's the satrap of Gaza, like the mayor, like the governor. He's a bureaucrat. And he comes out and says, what is all this kerfuffle out here? You slaves, you settle down. You get back to work or there'll be trouble. And then he does something which is not very smart. He launches into a tirade against Jehovah. He taunts their God, and that's not very smart, because now the Israelites have an individual to focus their rage against. And Samson seizes this moment to call out Abimelech. That's the name of the satrap. Abimelech, he says, God, listen to me now, God is going to bring you down. God is going to bring down your people. God will bring down the false god Dagon that you all worship. Mark my words, you are going down. Now, the operative word there is down. And we know, if you've listened to my broadcasts in the past, we know that a musical idea, a motif, a collection of notes or a theme or a short musical subject can be used by composers to represent a person, a place, a thing, an object, an idea, a concept. Happens all the time. Wagner did it more than anybody else, but Saint-Saens, who admired Wagner, is up to the task as well. And in this case, there is a musical idea that recurs throughout the opera, and it symbolizes the idea of downfall, ruin, doom. And all I can do is sing it for you. It is a descending scale, and what musicians would call a chromatic scale. That is not just the white keys of the piano, do, ti, la, sol, fa, mi, re, do, but all the white keys and black keys. Ya, da, 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 da. And when you sing it like that, it does sort of sound like someone sliding downward towards their doom. Now, listen to this section here in which Samson is prophesying the downfall of the Philistines and of Abimelech, and you will hear the trombones of the orchestra punctuate his prophecies with a short little staccato burst of this downward chromatic scale, the symbol of Downfall. Now, we're not all blessed with an ear for music, but that was pretty obvious, right? It kind of hits you over the head. Bum, 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 bum. That is the downfall motif, the symbol of doom. And it's never going to sound the same way twice. It won't always be the trombones, as you'll hear. It won't always be loud and kind of testosterone infused like that. It will have many appearances, and I'm glad that you're listening to this broadcast because otherwise you might not notice it in performance. But it's there, and it's meant to be recognized. Well, at this point, Samson realizes that the people are with him, and he breaks into the first really rousing toe-tapping tune of the opera, which I facetiously call the Hebrew national anthem. He's really going to improvise on the spot a song of liberty, a rousing march-like anthem calling for the people of Israel to rise up and be free. The first words are, Israël, rompt le chaîne. Israel, break your chains. And it's a very stirring tune indeed. Here it is, the Hebrew national anthem. Stirring, isn't it? By golly, if we only knew the words, we would probably want to sing along by the time the Hebrew chorus joins him at the end there. And my friends, now I'm able to tie a bow on my big talking point of why France and the Paris Opera were so slow to accept Samson and Delilah, and why it was kind of unofficially banned and considered a dangerous topic. And it's that last track you just heard, Israel, Break Your Chains. Here I have to take about 5 minutes and do a little review of French political history. So what is Act 1 about? It's about an oppressed people, working class, who feel that they are slaves, who feel that they have no rights. All their human rights have been taken from them. And a leader inspires them, and they rise up, and they're going to, by the end of this scene, they have achieved their freedom. They break away, and they run back to their homeland. Terrific. Let's look at what had been happening in France for over half a century, because this same scenario had occurred not once, not twice, not 3 times, but 4 times. Of course, in the 1780s, there was a little kerfuffle that made all the papers. You may have heard about it. It was called the French Revolution. And a lot of royals and blue blood nobles went to the guillotine. And life settled back down to normal. By the year 1830, 35 years before Saint-Saens begins the composition of the opera, the King of France is Charles X. And by 1830, in the summertime, Charles's approval ratings were tanking in all the polls. CNN, NBC, Harris poll, he was in the low teens because he had created a society that favored the aristocrats. The working class people of France felt oppressed. Charles was their oppressor. He really did not treat them well. They couldn't vote. They couldn't own much property. They were taxed out of all regard. The death penalty was applied to them for trivial offenses. And the time came when these working class folks said enough. And they got together a band of several hundred, if not 1,000, and in June of 1830, in an event that history books call the Three Glorious Days, they overwhelmed the palace guards. They attacked, and poor Charles had to flee for his life. He left the throne. He took the hovercraft to England and spent the rest of his days in exile in England. And everybody said, "We did it!" Just like our grandfathers did in the French Revolution. Yay, us! And Charles, who was from the House of Bourbon, was gone. They put his cousin from the House of Orléans, Louis Philippe, on the throne. And you know how it is with a new government. There's a honeymoon period for a while. Everything's hunky-dory. Louis Philippe, he's our man. If he can't do it, no one can. But within a couple of years, the bloom was off the rose. The honeymoon was definitely over because Louis Philippe created a society in which all privilege and status went to the banking class, the financiers, the wealthy, the 1%. And again, the common working man feels forgotten. He feels he has no rights. Now, at this point, I want to ask all of you folks out there, raise your hand if you're familiar with the classic Broadway musical, or actually a global musical, not just Broadway, Les Miserables by Claude Michel Schomburg. Ah, look at all those hands going up. Everybody has seen either the stage version or the film. All right, now, you remember the scene in Les Miserables in which there are those barricades across the streets of Paris and rebels, scruffy working class people are firing bullets and there's gunfire between the government and the rebels. This was the attempt. It was called the August Rebellion, the Rebellion of 1832, in which working class people gathered together an ad hoc army of a few thousand and tried to do what they had done 2 years earlier. They wanted to oust Louis Philippe off the throne, just as they had done to Charles X. The problem is their few thousand were met by a combined army force for the king of 60,000. And in a hail of gunfire, they were squashed like bugs. That rebellion failed. There was a young writer named Victor Hugo who was dodging bullets, trying to get out alive. He did, and he incorporated this scene into his novel, Les Miserables, which, of course, becomes that famous musical. Well, they settled back down into grumpy defeat for a few years. By the 1840s, there was revolution all over Europe, Germany, pretty much everywhere. And now the rebels were better organized. There was a significant revolution. And in 1846, Louis Philippe is chased off the throne. So, see, it's only a couple of decades later that Camille Saint-Saens is depicting the very same thing in this opera. And it was too soon. It was all too raw. The scars hadn't healed. The government, perhaps rightly, felt that this would stimulate and provoke restlessness and unhappiness among working people again, and they just couldn't go through it again. So by 1890, they felt that, okay, enough time had passed. You know, what I've been telling folks in my lectures around the Commonwealth of Virginia and this opera, it's like, suppose I, Glenn Winters, had just completed an opera yesterday about the marches in Charlottesville that happened about a month ago, with the white supremacists and the statues being removed and the people and the big riots that happened and the tragic death. It might make a good opera, but you know what? No one would want to do that opera right now. It's too soon. Glenn, no, we can't do that on the stage. It's just going to create more civil unrest and more riots and more fights and more deaths. Maybe 30 years from now, but not now. And that was the situation. Believe it or not, Samson and Delilah, which you think of as a rather sleepy Bible story, was actually a hot potato. It was a hand grenade in the 19th century. And there's another bond between Les Miserables and Samson and Delilah. Not only does that scene in Les Miserables depict one of those uprisings that caused Samson and Delilah to be held in disfavor, they actually have a musical number in common. Now, we just heard that liberty anthem that Samson improvised and got the people to join him in. Remember how it went? Da-da-dum, bum, ba-da, dum, 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 dee-da, yup-up-up-bum, da-dee-da, da-da-dum, dum, da-da. Now, in Les Miserables, in that scene of the barricades, there is a similar chorus, which is so similar it almost surely was inspired by Samson. It's called Do You Hear the People Sing? I think you'll hear the similarity.
Then join in the fight that will give you the right to be free. Do you hear the people sing? Sing the song of angry men. It is the music of the people who will not be saved again. When the beating of your heart echoes the beating of the drums, there is a life about to summons the mortal comes. Will you hear all you can hear?
So my question, is there any difference between those two numbers? The rhythm and the tempo is the same. The tune is the same. It has the same kind of inspirational swagger. The words express the same sentiments. And the people singing it are in the same situation. And yet, I get people who come up to me and say, well, Glenn, opera's a little boring. I love Broadway. Okay. Sometimes there's little difference between the two art forms. Sometimes there's a lot of difference. Maybe not in this case. All right, so they get their freedom. Abimelech is, Samson kind of does a World Wrestling Federation, helicopter act on him, runs him through with a spear like a shish kebab, and the Hebrews run away, and they've achieved their freedom for the time being, and Samson is their champion. So in the second scene, we need to meet our villainous and our prima donna, our sultry mezzo-soprano Delilah. The Bible is not too specific about who Delilah was. She is simply a paid operative of the Philistines. She's actually paid 100 shekels of silver to entrap and weaken Samson. In the opera, she is a priestess in the temple of Dagon, and she does not accept money. They offer her money. She says, no, I'm doing this because I really hate Samson and I want to see him suffer. And she has no redeeming character traits whatsoever. She is sinister, she's scheming, she's mocking, she's evil, she lies, and she's a good liar. She's really good at it. In the second scene, Samson is kind of chillaxing in the town square of Gaza, with a pumpkin spice latte from Starbucks, enjoying his freedom, watching the priestesses dance, a lovely ballet I don't have time to play for you. And Delilah comes out, and she's already, maybe unbeknownst to us if we don't know the story, baiting a trap for Samson. Delilah has 3 arias. It's a star-making part. We're going to hear excerpts from all 3. And they're different as they can be. The first one is Delilah holding up a mask. She is singing a song which the words you could mistake for that number from Camelot. 'Tis May, the lusty month of May. She sings about printemps, the springtime, when love is in the air and people are thinking about the opposite sex. This aria is not the most dynamic mezzo aria. It's not as thrilling or sensual as her other arias will be. Here she's trying to be womanly, unthreatening, and benign. She's singing to Samson, saying, gosh, I miss you. Don't you miss me? It's springtime. Shouldn't we just be happy together? So the purpose of this aria is for her to present a false image to Samson of being this unthreatening, benign, womanly, kind, gentle creature.
Amour
And that's a sample of her first kind, gentle, deceitful aria. And again, what she's doing here is she is the cat laying out a piece of cheese for the mouse. And Samson is the mouse. She's setting a trap for him. Samson knows what she's doing. He knows that he needs to be strong and resist, but golly, she is a fine-looking woman. And that's how Act One ends. Now, of course, the first act of any opera, any play, any movie is exposition, to meet the characters and find out what their issues and goals are. It's in Acts 2 and 3 that Samson and Delilah really takes off and becomes quite a compelling masterpiece. Act 2 will be the scene of Samson's seduction. And as the curtain comes up, remember our downfall motive we mentioned a few minutes ago when Samson was calling out the Philistine Abimelech and prophesying doom? We had that trombone phrase repeated several times. Bom, 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 bom. A downward chromatic scale that is this composer's musical representation of doom. Now, it's not just the Philistines who meet doom. Samson is going to also have his downfall at the hands of Delilah. So as the curtain comes up on Act 2, listen to what has become of our downfall motive in a swirling, kind of sensuous, almost agitated orchestral prelude. It sounds nothing like that downfall motive, nothing like those angry trombones from the first scene in Act 1, and yet it's made up of the same musical material, those downward, descending, sliding chromatic notes. Now, as I say, swirling in a particularly suggestive way of the sensuality that is to come. And Delilah is a bit impatient. It's not like they made a date. She doesn't know if he's going to show up. She thinks he will, that he won't be able to resist her. And in case he is inclined to resist, she now sings her second of the three arias. This one is called Amour vient aider. And it's a soliloquy. There's no one there listening to her. And she's calling on love, as if it were the god or goddess of love, to come and assist her in bringing about the ruin of Samson. And this is Delilah without the mask. In a soliloquy, people tell you what they're really thinking and really feeling, and here's where we feel and hear the passion of her hatred in a most compelling aria. Here's an excerpt from cadenza in the middle of the aria, the climax, returning to the sweeping grand main theme.
Moi, c'est entre tous, je le brave. Il retient à mes
Quite a compelling showpiece for a dynamic mezzo-soprano. And Samson comes lumbering in. He's actually come to say farewell. He's thought it over, and he thinks it won't work out between them. He wishes her best of luck in her future plans, and he's got a job to do. He's got business with Jehovah, and you'll find the right fellow one of these days, Delilah. So see you later. And this is when she the mouse is about to escape the cat. So she launches into her aria of seduction. When I was a younger fellow, when I was a kid, this aria was much more in vogue than it is today, I think. But it is a perfect job of opera composition. I don't know if Saint-Saens is the greatest opera composer. Verdi, Mozart, Puccini, and Benjamin Britten and others, and Wagner might have something to say about that. But I will tell you that in this aria, my heart lies at thy feet, mon cœur. No composer could have done a better job of rising to the occasion, of writing as sexy a piece of music as possible. Now, I've mentioned over and over this downfall motive. Well, this seduction is Samson's downfall, so you might expect to hear it. I haven't even played for you all the iterations of this motive. They recur from time to time in the dialogue and other people's numbers. But you would expect to hear it now, and you certainly will. The form of this aria is verse, refrain, verse, refrain. Now, you don't hear it at first. It's a lovely melody. It's very... it's just very powerfully sexual. But the downfall motive is not present in it, I think psychologically, because Delilah is not sure that she's got him. She's not sure that she has this power over him, because after all, he was on his way to leave her. So here is the first verse of this refrain, and as beautiful as it is, there's not that descending chromatic scale yet. Wow, how to describe that music? It's voluptuous, it's exotic, it is pure musical carnality. And it sets up the first refrain. Now, this refrain, now she she sees Samson staring at her slack-jawed with his tongue hanging out, and she says, "I've got him." So now the downfall motive of a descending chromatic scale is going to start to appear in her seduction. And for the first time, it will be in the vocal melody. We haven't heard it sung before. We've heard it in the trombones, in flutes, in oboes, and so forth. Now, the perfect psychological moment for it to be sung by the agent of Samson's downfall. I've known this tune for 50 years. Until I began preparing these classes and lectures, it never occurred to me that it's not just a gorgeous, sexy tune, it is also musical symbolism. And here it is. And how did that refrain begin? Where was that musical motif representing downfall? Da, 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 and so forth. Not once, but twice. Absolute perfect. A perfect job of setting words to music. And then, now she's really got him, so she launches into the second verse, and now that same melody that we heard without the downfall motive initially, now listen to how the orchestra infuses it with that swirling iteration of the rapidly repeated downward chromatic scales. When I hear this, it always sounds to me like Samson's head is swimming. His senses are spinning like he's intoxicated on the wine of her beauty and sexuality. And this is the moment, he's putty in her hands. This is the moment when she says, would you like it blocked or tapered in the back? She doesn't actually say that. But he yields to her embraces, and before anything much can happen, the soldiers come out from hiding spots and take him prisoner, and the curtain comes down. In Act 3, Samson has his first great solo scene. Some time has passed. He is blinded. He is as weak as any man. His superhuman strength has been taken away because he's broken his sacred vows to God. And when the curtain rises, he is in a prison cell. He is chained to a giant millstone, and he is trudging in an endless circle, condemned to grind the Philistine harvest of grain, which is a little bit of insult to injury. If you read about the god Dagon, some scholars say that he was a god of the harvest, that they would pray to Dagon for favorable crops of wheat and barley. So here is Samson, the agent of Jehovah, who is condemned now for his faithlessness to have to process the fruits of the other god, Dagon, and turn the grain that he has given his people into flour. And Samson is about as miserable as a Hebrew champion can be. He sings a lengthy monologue, Vois ma misère, oh God, see me in my misery. I deserve this, but don't take it out on my people. Have mercy on them. I'm going to play you a moment that is extremely haunting and extremely effective. We only see Samson in his prison cell, but the Hebrew people are back in bondage without Batman, Superman, and Iron Man all rolled into one to protect them. They have once again been enslaved by the Philistines. And as you'll hear when Samson is finished a bit of his lament, he stops what he's doing and he listens to the distant voices of his compatriots as they castigate him and say, Samson, Samson, why did you fail us? Samson, you've let us down.
Je t'offre, Dieu, ma pauvre Brigitte. Je ne suis plus qu'un objet de risée. Il m'aura vu la lumière du ciel. Il m'enverra
That is extremely effective and compelling operatic composition. Well, the finale of the opera takes place inside the temple of Dagon. We're going to see a Philistine worship service in praise of Dagon. You know, it's the 11 o'clock traditional service. There will even be a hymn. And they lead Samson in for the purpose of taunting him, mocking him, making fun of him. And he has to witness this false god being glorified by the people just to really torture him in ways that even physical torture cannot surpass. This takes the form, this worship service, of an extended ballet that is called a bacchanal. You know, Bacchus was the Greek god of wine and revelry, and so a bacchanal is basically an orgy. Now, if you go to YouTube and look at videos of the Samson and Delilah bacchanal, you'll see them all the way from G-rated to PG to R to, you know, practically X. I think you can rely on Virginia Opera to be tasteful in our depiction of a pagan people reveling in hedonistic delirium. And regardless of how much clothing they're wearing or what kind of action is taking place in the choreography, Camille Saint-Saens really delivers the crude, you know, this is when we see exactly how godless, you know, how carnal and how evil these Philistines are, because their music is one of utter pagan revelry, and Saint-Saens delivers. And at this point, they start to have their fun. At the conclusion of the bacchanal, they have their fun with Samson. Oh, look at the mighty hero. Yeah, what's the matter, Samson? Somebody turn off the lights? I'm not quoting the libretto. I'm giving you the gist of the hard time that they're giving this man who is utterly powerless now. And they're having a good time with him. And that includes Delilah. The cat caught the mouse. And there's no need for the cat to pretend to be a sweet pussy kitty cat anymore. And, you know, we just heard that third aria of hers, the seduction aria, just a few moments ago, and it has that beautiful, sensuous theme. Dee-dum, da-dee-da, dee-dum, da-da. Now, as Delilah gets in his face to taunt him, listen to her sing a crude, vulgar parody of that love theme. And the woodwinds giggling as they play that downfall theme. Ding, diddly dum, diddly dum, diddly dum, boom. Turning love into a parody and showing how she never meant it all along. And right here, I just have to parenthetically tell you that in Delilah, folks, can we talk about Saint-Saens' mother for just a moment? Oh boy. His mother did a number on him. Delilah is actually a composite of the two women who dominated the composer's life and with whom he had very unhealthy relationships. One was his mother, Clémence. Clémence, when she gave birth to Saint-Saens, the composer's father died when he was a baby. He never had a father figure. And she sent him to live with a nurse out in the country, 20 miles from where she lived, for the first 2 years of his life. I guess she was not into changing diapers, you know? And so, if you know anything about childhood development, this composer never had a chance to bond with his mother. There's a limited window of time in which you can have a normal relationship with a parent. And when he returned to her as a toddler, he lived with her, except for brief periods, he lived with her alone until she died about 55 years later. He lived with his needy, disapproving, just cruel mother. She was impossible to please. He never could do good enough for her. No matter how famous he was, how idolized, how much of a celebrity he was, he never did good enough for her. Here's an example. I'm going to read a letter that she wrote to him once. Saint-Saens was going to play a joint concert with the great Franz Liszt, and he was a little nervous, and he made the mistake of confiding to his mother that he was a little anxious about this concert. And here's what she wrote to him in return. Dear friend, I found your letter upon my return from Mass. You make me ill with your fears. I used to think you are a man. You are merely a coward. I regard you with contempt. I believed I had raised up a man. Instead, I have brought up only a girl of degenerative stock. Either you play well or I renounce you as my child. And friends, that was the gist of their relationship for over half a century, when he had to live with her and put up with her and try to please her. So you see, when Delilah emasculates and mocks and hates Samson, the hero, that's his mother. But when she overwhelmed him with her sexuality and then frustrated him by denying it to him, that was the other woman in his life, a beautiful woman who had all of the men of Paris, of intellectual and artistic circles, panting after her. The beautiful Augusta Holmes, an Irish woman who born and lived in Paris. She had flaming red hair. She had a body like a goddess. She was talented. She was a composer, a pianist, and a singer. And Liszt was crazy about her. César Franck was in love with her. Rossini was gaga about her. And so was Camille Saint-Saëns. He proposed marriage. He was infatuated with her. And she humiliated him. She condescended to him and said, oh, you know, you're such a talented pianist. I always enjoy hearing you play. Bye-bye now. You know, she rejected him. So when Delilah overwhelms Samson with sensuality, that's Augusta Holmes. This character is kind of his personal issues influencing the choice of subject that he made. Delilah is even more evil in the opera than she is in the Bible, and that's because of the misogyny and dysfunctional view of women that Camille Saint-Saëns had. Well, we get to the finale. So once Delilah has taunted Samson, the high priest calls for him to be led up to the center of the temple, which, as you can probably guess, happens to be between two pillars, the two pillars that are the foundation for holding up the entire architectural design. Must be a kind of a design flaw. Well, you know, architecture's come a long way since then. And there is Samson, and they sing a rousing hymn, Gloire à Dagon, glory to Dagon. Samson, as you're going to hear, is going to make a final prayer to Jehovah. And it is this: I don't deserve it, but please listen to me. Give me one more burst of strength, I beg you. And as he takes his place between the pillars, I want you to listen, because we will have the final and very stirring return of the downfall motive. And once again, as it was for a little bit of symmetry, as it was in Act 1, Scene 1, it's going to be Samson prophesying the doom of the Philistines as they laugh at him. And those trombones, once again, will give us that musical motif that represents their downfall. Bum, 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 bum. A very difficult and challenging moment for Samson as he's got to go up to a high B flat, extend it for some time. A most difficult moment for the tenor, as Placido Domingo does it beautifully in this recording. And as he is approaching that high note, I want you to listen for one final thing: a solo trumpet, unaccompanied by the orchestra, playing this tune. Bum, 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 bum. And that is a stirring and emotional reprise of that hymn to liberty, the anthem that the Hebrews sang back in the moment of their first liberation in the first act. So plenty of musical symbolism and extra musical meaning here in this incredibly stirring finale to Samson and Delilah, from the delirious revelry of the Philistines to their final downfall. Samson and Delilah, grand opera at its grandest. You know, when we say grand opera, not all operas are grand. A grand opera is the equivalent of a Hollywood blockbuster. Not those little indie films that they show at the Sundance Film Festival, but, with spaceships and special effects and monsters and crowd scenes and big epic saga. The Ten Commandments, Lawrence of Arabia, Star Wars, Samson and Delilah. And let me put a bow on this by making one more remark about the political overtones of this opera. You know, if you read about opera, the New York Times, Opera News, and sort of keep track of what's being said in the opera world, a lot of people these days, there's a great deal of hand-wringing about the relevance of opera. Opera has to be relevant. I don't know if it's relevant anymore. How can we make opera relevant? You know, some people think it belongs in a museum because it's just not relevant to today's society. Well, let me ask you a question. Are there working class people in the world, or even in this country today, who think they've been forgotten? Are there working class people who think that they don't have all the rights to which they're entitled? Well, yeah. Name me a period of history or a society or a culture in which that's not always the case. And if that's always the case, then Samson and Delilah will always be relevant. It was so relevant. It's a story that took place. Samson lived in the 10th century, or the 11th century BC, all those eons ago. And yet his story remains so relevant that it caused this opera to be banned for 2 decades in the composer's native city. Opera is about the continuing journey of the human race and the problems of human nature and how we treat one another. That's what all operas are about, whether how nations treat each other or friends and lovers treat each other. And those issues are universal and they are always relevant. Samson and Delilah could still be a political hot potato. Well, that's our opera. Please come and see it. It's not to be missed. Aren't you curious to see how that temple will come down? Aren't you curious to see how that will be accomplished on the stage? There's only one way. Pony up and buy a ticket, and I'll see you at the Opera House.